Howdy, folks. It's Annika here, and we're going to get started. Let me just make sure my sound works, and then we are good. I'm going to get a little confirmation here. All right, great. We just got some confirmation. We can hear, so we can go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for showing up today. Today is the second installment in the winter off-season workshops for Dirtbound. I'm really excited to be here today and to be able to present. I do want to kind of start off today and just acknowledge that there's, some pretty horrific wildfires happening in Southern California, and it does feel weird to be, leading this workshop, knowing that there's just so much destruction going on. So my heart definitely goes out to those that are impacted and affected, and I'm hoping that that the fire does get contained and that people are led to safety. So, okay, well, switching gears a little bit, I want to kind of jump into today's topic. Today is all about supporting adaptive riders on the trail. This is actually one of my kind of favorite topics to talk about when it comes to thinking about adaptive mountain biking and adaptive off-road cycling. And in a lot of ways, I kind of think of this as like a really good intro course. This is a course or a workshop that I first did in person and then have adapted to online. But it's something that I'm really excited to have live here on YouTube so that, in the future, people can kind of refer to this and use it as necessary, right? Like the idea here is that you can send this video to your trail organization, the group that you ride with, your friends, and they'll have some good context on how to support adaptive riders. So this video and this channel is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. So super excited for the support here. A little bit about my organization. So Dirtbound is a para off-road cycling initiative that aims to empower, develop, and support para off-road cyclists. Who am I? Well, I will say that I do have a video now on my YouTube channel introducing who I am. We'll do like a full video at some point, a little bit more about my history. But in short, what you need to know is I'm an adaptive athlete. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I ride both mountain and gravel bikes. I advocate for Black, Indigenous people of color, and individuals with disabilities in the outdoor space and mostly in the cycling space. And then outside of my life as a cyclist, I work with satellites. So I started this last workshop with a few of these slides as well, because I think it just shows and gives you some really good context here. So we are going to repeat a little bit of the same material, so bear with me. But who is an adaptive rider? Well, anyone that identifies as an adaptive rider. And I really want to emphasize this because I think sometimes there's this idea of maybe there's like some criteria or classification or test you need to take, or a certain type of disability, or visible, or a certain class of disability. And that's just not true, right? If somebody says, hey, I'm an adaptive rider, or I'm a para off-road cyclist or para athlete, just be like, cool, that is good to know, right? It's anybody that identifies. And typically when we're talking about adaptive riders, we're thinking about individuals that typically have permanent physical or permanent intellectual disabilities. But this isn't always the case, right? There are times where maybe you have a disability and then you don't. Maybe you're temporarily disabled. You can also identify as an adaptive rider. It's not an exclusive club. So there's a variety of adaptive off-road bikes. You can also ride an upright bike. Upright bike is just the kind of bike you think of when you think of that two-wheeled bicycle. but there's a variety of adaptive bikes. There are bikes that have three wheels, there are bikes that have two, there are bikes that have four wheels. There's tandem bikes, so there's two people on the bikes. There's bikes that have an additional seat in the front, where the individual is maybe not propelling with their hands or their feet. There's so many different styles of bikes. And I really want to emphasize here that there's no one right type of adaptive bike. There's no one bike that's like not an adaptive bike. You can have attachments to your bike that make it adaptive. It really just depends on who the rider is and how they're interfacing. But I love to show this slide because I like to get people to get really excited about seeing different styles of bikes on the trail. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a full time wheelchair user. I don't have use of my legs. And so I use a three-wheeled bike. And that three-wheeled bike has, two wheels in the front and one in the back. And that's how I ride. So I ride kind of like recumbent bike. My feet are out in front. And so yeah, that's how I ride. But once again, somebody else might ride in a different way. I like to say, what's accessible to me or how I do things might not be how somebody else is going to do things. And that's totally fine. Let me get back over here. There we go. So I started these out last time, but this is a hill that I am going to die on, and so be it. E-assist is not cheating. So I have a bike that has e-assist. It's not cheating. I don't have the use of my legs. My arms are 1/4 of the muscle mass of my legs. And so I need that extra boost. My bike is 100 pounds. I need that extra boost to help get me around. And also, it's just fun, right? Like, I want to be able to enjoy the outdoors. I want to be able to enjoy the trails. And that e assist allows me to do that. So, e assist is not cheating. And also, e assist is not even cheating for able bodied athletes, right? I really want to reduce the stigma around e bikes and e assist. And it's just like, you know what, just let people do what they want to do and let people ride how they want to ride and interface with their environment how they want to do that. Another key point here, and these are kind of like the ground rules for our community, but all electric adaptive mountain bikes, AMTB is adaptive mountain bike. Bikes are bikes. They're not motorcycles. They're not motorbikes. They're not buggies. They're not go-karts. Goodness, what else have I heard? They're not cars. They're not motor vehicles. They're bikes. So this is a bike that I have. It's called a Bowhead Reach. It's all electric. This bike allows me to go places. It allows me to keep up with my friends. It gives me an enjoyable experience on the trails. And I am so thankful for this bike every single day. And I can't tell you how many times I've had some really off-putting comments about what this bike is or what I'm doing out there. But all electric adaptive mountain bikes, they are bikes. There could be so many reasons why a person may need to use a bike like this. There could be many reasons why a person wants to use a bike like this. In my kind of world and dirt bound and my advocacy world, I don't care what type of bike you ride or how you ride bikes, right? It's just about you getting outside and feeling joy. And that's the most important thing. I'm not going to police what you're riding or how you're riding. And there's no one way to ride, right? So we're going to be talking a little bit kind of about this world and like adaptive mountain biking and supporting folks on trails. But you know what? You can ride however you want. If you want to ride on the bike path, maybe you want to ride on the beach. Maybe you just want to ride your bike to take your dog for a walk. Or maybe your bike allows you to hike with your family. Or maybe you like to go on slow rides. Maybe you're like to go on fast rides. There's so many different ways that you can ride a bike. And they're all valid. And I really want to emphasize this too, because I think sometimes when people are thinking about getting into para off-road cycling or adaptive mountain biking or getting into an outdoor sport, that there's like one way that they need to do this. Maybe like they want to like look a certain way, or they feel like maybe they have to get into racing, or maybe they have to do these like really technical things. And it can add a lot of pressure to folks. And I think the reality is, it's like, no, if you want to do those things, you can, but that's not a requirement to participate, right? To be a part of our adaptive mountain biking community or para off-road cycling community, all it takes is just the interest, right? If you don't even have to have your own bike. Maybe you're just interested in it. Maybe you've only ridden once. You're still a part of the community. So let's talk a little bit more about the ground rules here around, supporting adaptive riders and just kind of community in general. These are like the big do's and don'ts here, and pretty serious about these things. Don't touch someone or their bike without consent. And I know this kind of goes without saying, but I can't tell you how many times I've been on an adaptive ride or entered into a community space where people suddenly feel like, because they're a support rider, that they have the autonomy or authority to touch me or my bike. And I want you to think about this. Like, if you are an able-bodied person and you ride with able-bodied folks, when you go on a ride, do you automatically go up and start touching somebody or their bike? Probably not. And so you don't want to do this with an adaptive rider. I'm also going to note that a lot of this content here is kind of geared towards me speaking to, like, like I said, like a trail organization or somebody that's interested in learning how to support an adaptive rider. And then I ride, once again, a three-wheel mountain bike, so some of this content is geared more towards that. The second ground rule here is always wait until a rider asks for help. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat here. Let's say somebody has like rolled down a hill or is unconscious, like obviously help the rider. But don't just assume that somebody needs help. So maybe you do know somebody's skill limit, and maybe you're anticipating something, on the trail that they might have a challenge with or whatever. Just do your best to kind of respect the person and their autonomy, right? And wait until somebody asks for help. And I say this because this has happened to me so many times. People either stop me from going on a feature or try to touch my bike or hold me up when they think that I might have a problem or an issue. And like, it just is really off-putting, and it makes you feel like, I'm not kind of my own person. So always wait until a rider asks for help. Another thing is, don't assume that all adaptive riders are new or beginner. And I know this also sounds really obvious, but once again, like, it happens probably like 3 or 4 times at this point a season, where I enter into a space and somebody just assumes that this is like my first time riding, that I want to go on a green trail, that I don't know how to use my equipment, that I need help, that I need coaching. And for me, that's just not the case, right? If I want coaching on a feature, I'll ask for that help, or, what it is. Now, there are going to be instances where people are new riders and they'll probably disclose that information, but just kind of reduce the stigma that everybody that's, disabled or interacting in this realm is a beginner, because that's just not the case. And then do remember that adaptive mountain biking is just like mountain biking. And I say this because I've been on rides and people are like, wow, that was so much fun. That was just like mountain biking. And I'm like, yeah, because we're on a mountain bike ride. And I just happen to ride a different style bike, but this is still generally the active mountain biking, and we're in this space. So when you're entering this, just be like, look, everybody here is showing up to ride just like I am, and we're all in the same sport, and kind of like level the playing field around this. So another ground rule here is always ride and guide within your skill levels. And this is so critical because let's say you're going to be riding with a friend, and maybe it's not even like a formal ride. Maybe you're just like going out with your friend on an adaptive bike. and you're going in like a support capacity, or you have to support somebody, or you're willing to do that. If you get in over your head, like what's going to happen, right? Like, let's say I've got my 100-pound bike and we are riding in a really precarious trail or precarious region. What happens if I tip over, right? Like, or what happens if, um, like I need some additional help? Like, are we going to be able to do that, right? And so when I'm thinking about folks that are organizing these types of rides, think about matching, support riders of a certain skill level with their riders of a certain skill level. And then also making sure that people that are in a support capacity have the physicality to be able to support in that capacity. Because it's one thing for somebody to be like, I would love to support, but if they're unable to physically support, then it can present some challenges. You can get around that by maybe adding a couple more individuals to support. And this is like the most important ground rule, but always have fun, right? Like, these rides are supposed to be fun. And so if you notice, like, as you're guiding a ride or you're leading something or you're riding with friends and it's not fun, like, check in with yourself, check in with the people around you, and make some adjustments, because we're out here to have fun. Unless we are training for a huge endurance feat, etc. Um, we're out here to have fun. So I have a question here. Gretchen asked in the chat, are there opportunity for support rider trainings in person anywhere? And that's a really good question. So um, there are. I have done this course in person in Arkansas. And so, the idea is yes, there should be more of these opportunities. And I would say, and I would encourage people that are leading rides, that have adaptive riders, to think about leading these types of in-person trainings before rides, or having kind of a volunteer session where people can kind of get up to skills with these things. And later in the session, Gretchen, I will talk a little bit about like coaching and ride leading opportunities, which do cover some of this material. So now that we've established our ground rules, let's talk about communication and why it's important. So, if you're leading a ride in kind of like a more official capacity, you're generally going to have to be communicating with people on the trail, before the ride, all of that. I do notice that there's a typo in here. So sorry, I am a one person show. I can't catch everything. But the first question you want to ask yourself is, what approach will you use, right? And this can be around the terms of, like, if you're leading a ride, maybe it's a larger group ride. Are you going to have a ride leader? Are you going to have a ride suite? Maybe there's some folks in between. Are there going to be support riders for all adaptive riders? Are there going to be like no support riders? Well, maybe you're the support rider and you're the ride leader. Are you just riding with your friend? Like, what's the general approach of kind of your style for entering into this ride space? And then, kind of based on what that approach is, establish a plan, right? And so maybe the plan is, okay, so we've got, folks, we've got 5 folks we're riding with. I am going to wait at every trail junction and make sure that people know to go left here. Or maybe we will pause at every junction of trail and wait until everybody is there, and then we will all go left. Or, if there are features that require additional support for whatever reason, maybe we're going to stop everybody and session that feature. So thinking kind of about how you're going to establish that plan. There's also plans that you may need to establish depending on the population you're riding with. So let's say you're riding with folks that are VI or vision impaired. Maybe using hand signals isn't going to be the best method of communicating which way to go on trails. So maybe establishing a plan that requires you to verbalize those plans. Let's say you're riding with folks that are deaf or hard of hearing. shouting trail directions and information is probably not going to be the best way to communicate. So maybe you need to have a combination of using hand signals or sign language or establishing some other way to communicate with your riders. And I know this sounds like really obvious, but uh, full disclosure, I, help lead a community inclusion ride with SRAM every year. Well, for the last 2 years at Seattle Classic, and there was a complete oversight. Us organizers were not thinking about the population of individuals that we were riding with, and we had some of our friends that were deaf that were along for the ride, and we were like shouting which way to go. And then I remember my friend was like, "Hey, like, I don't know if people are listening to us." And we were like, "Oh, yeah." Like, we didn't really think that thoroughly through. And so, establish the plan before you get to a place if you know who you're going to be riding with. But there are some instances where maybe you're riding with a big group or whatever it is, and you don't know who you're going to be riding with. So, just be open to modifying that plan based on the riders and the riding venue. And what I mean by kind of like the riding venue is, let's say, you know, there's like a lot of rain. Maybe people can't hear you very well, or um, there's just like different aspects of kind of like where you're riding or how the trail is set up, and how that could impact your communication method. Maybe there's like at the local riding zone where I'm at, there are so many different trail junctions. And so maybe the plan is everybody needs to stay close to each other and have no gaps so that we don't have to stop at every junction, because if we stopped at every junction, we would never get anywhere. So yeah, be open to modifying your plan. And I do want to put, there's no one right way to do this. You might establish one way or one plan one time, and then the next time you're like, we're going to do something else. And if you get to a ride and you're in any type of support capacity, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to communicate with folks. Like, the group is large or it's a population of people you haven't worked with. Just ask folks like, hey, how would you like me to communicate objects on the trail? Or how would you like me to communicate that we are moving in one direction? Or how do you want me to communicate that we are stopping or going? I think that's always like a good way to lead. And it also allows people to feel like they're part of the community and that they're helping making these decisions. So, let's talk about like doing a pre-ride skills assessment. And this is really geared towards that like very organized ride. And this comes from kind of a coaching perspective. So for those that don't know, I have my coaching certification. And when thinking about how to work with larger groups or even a smaller group or one-on-one, it's really important to understand where your rider's skill levels are. And it's not just like assessing like, are they going to be able to do this drop or jump, right? Like, making sure that folks like do know how to use their brakes or are braking correctly. This is pretty important. And you don't have to do like a big old thing. It doesn't have to take 30 minutes of the ride, right? It could just be like, hey, let's warm up in the parking lot and make sure that our bikes and our gear are okay and make sure we're all doing well. And you don't have to like explicitly be like, I'm watching you to make sure you know how to ride your bike. Like, think about it as more from like, you want to just have and gather as much information about the people you're riding with and less about like checking them off for skills, right? It's just like, it's kind of important to know, who the people you're riding with are and where their skills are. Um, don't sleep on bike and gear checks. And this is really important. And you can do this during your pre-ride skills assessment, but making sure that your brakes work, making sure that folks have enough air in their tires, making sure seating is correct, padding, making sure folks, helmets are okay, that they have eye protection, making sure that everybody has enough gear with them for flats, etc. This is really important. And this is not just for adaptive riders, right? Like, this is just something you should do before you go out on a bike ride. And you don't always think about it like sometimes, like, as like, "Oh, I'm checking my gear," but like, before you go out on a ride, make sure that your critical bolts are in shape, make sure nothing's loose. Like, there's just things you do. But when you're going out on a group ride too, you can just be like, oh, hey, everybody, just like quick bike check, like make sure we're all okay. Um, when folks are checking their bikes and checking their gear, it's super important, especially if you're in a support capacity, especially if you're leading these rides, to not shame riders for their gear. This is something I learned once again from like my coaching training, and it's common sense, but it's really important. I think like part of being fostering a community of inclusion is meeting people where they are and recognizing not everybody is going to have the same gear, not everybody needs the same gear, not everyone has access to the same opportunities. And so, maybe you see somebody with, maybe they're riding an upright bike and they've got tennis shoes. So long as it's like safe, like that's fine. They don't need to have mountain bike shoes, or somebody doesn't need to have the latest sunglasses or gloves, right? Like, what they have probably works fine, right? And unless you're like doing some long endurance ride or something in inclement weather, like what folks are wearing is probably okay, right? Like, obviously you don't want things hanging off of clothing like fringe or loose items, right? But most of the time it's fine and it's safe. So just be really cognizant when you are like doing gear checks and you're doing bike checks, that you're kind of like coming from like a really empathetic place, because this can be like a triggering moment for people, because they're like, oh, like everybody's looking at my stuff and my bike is really old, or I don't have this feature or whatever. And so just meet folks where they are and just like be really chill about this. All right, so let's talk about support, right? Like, this is why we're here. We want to learn, how are we going to support riders on the trail? And in this particular part, I'm going to be covering physical support. I'm going to be talking from a perspective that I have encountered, right? And so once again, I ride a three-wheeled bike. This is my perspective, but I am going to be sharing some tidbits for folks that have different disabilities, or who operate different types of bikes, or who interface with equipment differently than me. So there's different types of support, right? And when it comes to thinking about physical support, some physical support could be helping folks get in and out of bikes, helping folks get, onto bikes. And that's not just for trikes, right? I know some folks that ride upright bikes, but maybe getting their leg over the bike could be challenging, or maybe attaching their prosthetic into the handlebar might require some additional help. So there's lots of different ways to get in and out of bike. It's not just like getting somebody in and out of a trike, right? There's also providing balance support, right? So maybe somebody rides an upright bike, and for them, they need somebody to hold them or balance the bike, so that they can get started or stop. I'm just trying to give you some examples of like what this physical support looks like. And then there's this idea of like spotting folks, right? And so that means like, you're in a section of trail that might be challenging. Maybe it's a little over a rider's ability. Maybe the trail is just like not good for an adaptive bike. Maybe it's an exposure or balance situation. And so, as a support person, you can provide physical spotting to ensure that the rider and their equipment is able to safely pass over an area or over a feature. There's also this idea too about thinking, kind of like taking a step back around talking about trail selection, right? Like, how can you support a ride in that way? We'll think about trail selection, think about how to read a trail, like anticipating a person's needs. And then also trail guiding, right? Like that's a very important skill to have and a very important support skill. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of trail spotting, because I think this is one of the things that people get the most worried about. And I've been on a lot of rides where this is like the first question. People are like, "Well, I don't know what to do. So how can I help you?" This is also the reason why some people don't want to ride with me, because they don't know how to have a conversation around trail spotting. Now, in this particular picture, there is a person in a three-wheeled bike that has articulation, so it's a little bit tippy. You have to balance. And so, trail spotting for this individual might involve actually, using physically touching the person and their bike, right? Also asking consent for that. And so that's maybe what trail spotting could look like. But there are instances where, let's say, somebody's riding a upright bike and maybe they have like balance issues, and maybe not balance issues, but have a hard time balancing. Maybe you need to provide some additional support as a support person for that individual. Let's say somebody is riding a tandem bike and they're going down the trail, and maybe there is a really tight hairpin turn or a switchback that is challenging, and you need to just kind of like spot the person so that, or the people, so that they can like get around the corner. So there's going to be a lot of different ways for you to provide that support. Um, and I encourage you, especially, to talk with the people that you're riding with and figure out what's going to work for them. And I think this is where, kind of like, this is where I wish we could all be together and like working together, because I'd love to be able to allow you to use me and my bike as these examples. Now, just because you have spotted or supported one adaptive rider doesn't make you an expert. And it doesn't mean that everybody is going to want to be supported or spotted in that same way. And this is really important because in this particular example, we're looking at, a Bowhead RX. It's a very particular type of bike, but this is not the same as another bike. A person that rides this type of bike might not have the same, issues as a person that rides another bike. So once again, check in with the riders and find out, hey, like, do you have particular ways in which you would like me to support you on a trail? Like, what's okay for me to touch on your bike and what's not okay for me to touch on your bike? And if you are leading like an intro adaptive ride, or you're working with a population of beginners, like, they might not have that question. And so I would work with the folks that are running the organization or the people that have more experience and find out what that information is. But the key things here for doing trail spotting and spotting individuals is making sure that you are using the bike as kind of like your anchor points. So in this example of the rider, making sure that you are holding on to the bike of that rider, right? And not the rider, right? Like, you never want to pull somebody by their arms or their shoulders or something like that. Use the bike. Use parts on the bike that aren't going to break, so parts of the frame. And then this is, once again, if the person is familiar with their piece of gear, ask them, hey, where can I hold on to your bike to be able to lift you up? So there might also be instances where you might need to physically help somebody over or onto a feature. And I use this example as, for me, once again, I ride a three-wheel adaptive bike. I don't have the use of my legs. So there's no such thing as hike a bike. Hike a bike, for those that don't know, is this concept where you get to a challenging feature or a steep, up or down or something, and you get off your bike, or stream crossing, and you get off your bike and you walk with your bike either next to you or on top of you or something, but you have dismounted your bike. Well, for me, this is not an option. So if I get to a stream crossing or if I get to a technical section that I can't do on my own, I have to rely on the people that are with me. And this is why it's really important, once again, to ride within your skill level and guide within your skill level. Because, let's say I get to this trail and it is like way over my head. It's like a double black expert line or something like that. And I'm like, holy smokes, this is really hard. Like, I can't do the majority of these features. Well, now that means that my support riders, and I sure hope I have enough of them, are going to have to do that for me. And that's not really the intention, right? Like, we're trying to ride together, we're trying to have fun. Now, if you're on like a skills or a coaching ride or something like that, like at a clinic, um, you do want to kind of be out of your comfort zone a little bit, right? Like, you want to try some new features. So you will ride and guide at your skill level, but maybe, plus half a point or something like that. So just kind of thinking about those things. But in this particular example, uh, the folks that are spotting the rider are actually having to physically pick up the rider and their bike at the same time. And so when you're thinking about how do I staff my adaptive rides, or how many people do I need to ride, with these adaptive riders, this could be something that comes into consideration. So, like, if I'm riding a, harder green trail with a bunch of beginners, like, I want to make sure a bunch of beginners, and I have a bunch of beginners in larger or heavier bikes, I would probably go for like 1.5 support riders per rider. And the reason for that being is, like, if we need to pick somebody up, if somebody has fallen, we have adequate support for that. So kind of thinking about that, like, are you going to be able to do this on your own, or do you need additional help? There's this other kind of thing that you might hear about, like, in the adaptive community. It's this idea of like tail gunning, or a support rider, or a shadow rider. So in this picture, it's me on a trail, and then my support rider is behind me. And the support rider is behind me. We're riding together, but they have decided to take on a support rider capacity for this ride. And their kind of job for the ride is to ensure that if I need help, they're available to help. And so when I, as an adaptive rider, am riding with a support rider, or a tail gunner, or a shadow rider, I will typically try to develop, some type of relationship with this person very quickly if I don't know them already, and communicate to them the areas in which I have problems on the trail. So for me, I'm like, oh, I usually have problems on steep berms, on tight turns, and this kind of feature. And then I'll also say, like, so I will probably, like, whatever works for you, but what works for me typically is, like, I'll say I usually like to shout when I'm entering an area and I need help, and I will stop and I will wait for like confirmation, and then we can go from there. And then I usually kind of do like a mini onboarding, and I'm like, here's how you can support me. You can touch my roll bar, you can grab my bike in this way, etc. Right. And the idea here is that this person, for a portion of the ride or all of the ride, will be supporting you. I really want to like emphasize too that, like, this is like, in when you're leading like a very large group ride or a clinic, this is like a role that's like in more of like an official capacity, right? Like, you'd want to onboard volunteers to be able to do this, have these conversations, make sure that they're privy to the, kind of rules of your organization. But when you're riding with friends, your support rider ends up being your friends. Maybe you're just riding with a person. So it's really important to me that when I'm riding with like one other person, that we are riding bikes together, And then I try not to make it like you're here because I need support. No, we're riding out together, and I'm an adaptive athlete and I may occasionally need support here and there. And like, as my friend on this ride, like, are you okay with, picking me up if I fall, or are you okay with this? And so maybe just having a conversation with somebody. But I think it's really important for adaptive riders to feel like they're at the same level of kind of status of the people they're riding with, right? Like, we're not these like lesser people that need help. We just happen to need help because we have a physical or intellectual disability, and you happen to be a human and empathetic, and you're going to help, right? It's also really important too, if you're taking on this support rider capacity, that you think about how you're interacting with the people that you're supporting, right? So I kind of talked about it from the perspective of like an adaptive athlete and how I like to set up that power dynamic. But I've been in some weird situations where people think now, because they're my support rider, that they're like babysitting me, or they're like have like autonomy or ownership over me or something. Like, things can get really weird really fast, and it leaves for a really not fun experience. The most fun I've had on the trails is where we're riding, we're having a good time, and people just happen to be there and they're riding with us. And if we happen to fall, somebody's like able to pick us up. But it's not this like hierarchy, right? It's not this like situation that kind of occurs. Because, yeah, it just like feels weird. It feels weird. I think, too, something I'm really cognizant of like having a disability is like having to ask for help. Like, there's a lot of stigma around that. And I don't have a problem sometimes asking for help, but what comes up for me personally is like, what is this other person going to view me as or think of me as when I ask for help? Are they going to think I'm lesser, or I'm not as capable, or whatever it is? And so um, everybody's going to have kind of their own thing around that, maybe not a thing at all. But I just really want you to kind of like take a moment and be empathetic and put yourself in somebody's shoes that you could be supporting, and just say, okay, well, if I needed support and I was on the trail, like, what would it look like? Um, I think, too, as a support writer, something to really think about is like, um, you might not know the people that you're supporting, right? Like, maybe you're a volunteer for an organization. Maybe you just showed up at the ride and now this is what you're going to do. But you know, not everybody is going to like ask for help when they need it. So just like figure out ways to kind of like deal with situations that could arise. Maybe somebody is like consistently like taking risks that maybe they shouldn't, right? Or they routinely ask for help and they like don't need it, or they're not asking for help and they do. So it can get kind of interesting. And I think it depends on like what your capacity is in supporting this ride. Like, if like it's a clinic, then there's going to be kind of certain social rules and parameters around like what you can and should say. But if it's a social ride and you're riding with your friend, like, general rule of thumb is like don't say anything. Like, just let your friend have fun. And if they're like, so long as they're not like putting themselves at too much risk or others at risk, like, just have fun. And I also want to mention too, like, just because you're a support rider does not mean you're a coach. And just because I'm an adaptive rider and I might need help doesn't mean I want your help in telling me how to ride or how to go to a feature. Because there is nothing more annoying than somebody saying like, oh, I would just do this, or like, why don't you do this with your body, or why don't you do that? Like, think about asking for consent, or asking somebody, hey, like, do you want to be coached? And in most instances, like, no, I'm just like out to have a good time. Like, unless I'm in a clinic, like, do not tell me what to do. But once again, if you're in a clinic or if you're leading a beginner ride and that's the parameters of the ride, go for it. But be really conscious of the power dynamics and these relationships between like the support rider, the shadow rider, and the adaptive rider. The last thing I'll say about this is that this particular schema of like having a support rider and a rider is one that is carried into competition. And so if you're an individual that's like, I really want to try like a mountain bike race, or I really want to think about maybe doing a gravel race, or you're somebody on the other end that's like, I love to do these races and I want to support an adaptive rider, there's opportunity for this type of dynamic to exist in that world. If you're an adaptive rider and you don't have a dedicated support rider or somebody that can go with you to these things, reach out to events and ask if there's somebody that can volunteer. If you are an able bodied person and you want to support somebody in the adaptive category at a race, reach out to an organization that's helping, with this or the race itself and say, hey, I'd love to volunteer. So, when it comes to trail spotting, this is a little bit kind of like this part, but now here we are, we're like on the trail, and I just wanted to show. So in this particular instance, this person is spotting me by holding my roll bar and making sure I can get through. It's a little overkill in this photo. We got a couple other people that are coming through, but there were a few other folks that wanted to learn how to support in this capacity on this ride. And there were a few other people that were not on adaptive bikes that wanted some spotting. So this is kind of what like trail spotting can look like IRL or in real life. So those are all of the different ways you can kind of like physically support somebody. Actually, I do want to kind of go back about this. I've said this about like 5 times already, but I'm going to say this again, that a lot of this is coming from like my experience riding a 3-wheeled bike and using the equipment I use. Every single person that is an adaptive rider is going to have different needs. So what's accessible to me might not be accessible to someone else. My physical body changes every single day. So some days I can do some things, some days I can't. That's just my presentation with my spinal cord injury and the muscles that like come in and out. So it's going to look different for ways to spot me on trails and support me. And so just be kind of open to flexible to working with the riders and understanding their individual needs. So let's talk a little bit about like if you're leading or you're planning to lead an adaptive ride, there are certain things you can think of, like trail considerations, right? And so thinking about the width of the trail, are you going to be having folks that need help balancing on their bike? Maybe somebody is riding an upright bike and they need maybe 2 or 3 person support to get them on the bike and initiate the initial pedal strokes. Are you going to have enough space to do that on the trail? Is the trail wide enough for that? Or let's say somebody is riding a 3-wheel recumbent bike that's, powered by somebody's feet. Is the trail wide enough for them? Is the trail wide enough for somebody, that is riding a tandem bike in terms of, maybe thinking about the switchbacks, etc. So trail width is something that's really important to consider. If you don't know about a particular trail, I encourage you to ride the trail before your ride and try to imagine what it's like. You could also bring out a measuring tape and see like, hey, is this going to accommodate the widest style bike that we have in the organization or that our riders are going to ride? And then over time, you're going to just kind of like develop this eye for it. And you're going to be like, oh yeah, like I think that trail is wide enough. Now let's talk about camber. This is something that I love and hate at the same time. Camber is kind of like how slanted a trail is. And most of the time, maybe it's not an issue. Other times it is. But when you are riding a 3-wheeled bike, or maybe you have a prosthetic, camber can be something that can be an issue very, very quickly. So thinking about what it takes to balance on that off camber section. Are you going to be able to do that with the equipment that's necessary? Some bikes don't have good articulation. Some folks have a hard time getting in and out of their prosthetics, or maybe they're using clip in and clip out shoes, clips, but they don't have the greatest ability to twist their knees or something like that. And then they're on an off camber section, and then that creates like a fall hazard or something like that. So camber can once again become an issue very, very quickly if it's going to be one. So over time, you will start to understand kind of what that looks like. But I think the dangerous combination is like camber plus exposure. Exposure is like an example of that is like, let's say you're on a off camber section, so something that's like slanted like this in the middle of the trail, and then exposure, so there's a cliff on the side. That's a dangerous combination for somebody that might ride a three-wheel bike, or somebody that has issues with balance, or needs extra additional support with balance. So that's something to think about. Think about like the tipping hazard too, right? And so tipping hazard can come into play with exposure, right? If there's a drop off of the side of the trail. It could also be that some features kind of push you or pitch you in a position where maybe your bike isn't able to be stable on it, and you might need some additional help. And then if you don't have enough help, you could roll over or fall or tumble. That's like a tipping hazard. Another thing you want to think about is like features on the trail. And I'm not talking about like if a trail features too hard, right? No, I'm talking about like, let's say there's a stump in the middle of the in the middle of the trail, and the stump is like 3 feet tall. And for an upright bike, there is a slot next to the stump in the trail that an upright bike could easily pass. But for somebody with either a fat tire bike or a 3-wheeled or 4-wheeled bike, they're not going to be able to pass over that stump that's 3 feet tall with no place for their tires to fit. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about features. And then exposure, I mentioned this already. There's a steep drop off. Any combination of any of these issues, trail width, camber, tipping hazard, features, and exposure, whoo, we're talking really bad combo. Oh my gosh, I will share this experience, but there's a really amazing trail. It's in Santa Cruz, and it's like in the redwoods. It's so beautiful, but one of the trails to get up to this iconic trail has this section of exposure, so huge drop off, 30, 40 feet down to the bottom of like a riverbed. Okay, and then you've got a feature, so then you've got a literal tree stump that's like 2 feet tall, and then you've got trail width, very narrow trail width. And that combo between all three of those, and then you've got to get 2 or 3 support riders to physically lift me and my bike over this feature. Wow. I'll tell you what, that is a moment where I'm holding my breath and I'm just like, well, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go, because that's a lot. So when you're planning a ride, when you're setting up some fun for you and your friends, these are things that you need to consider. And no one expects that you're going to be an expert right away, right? You'll learn how to become better at these all the time. I ride with some folks kind of consistently, and I think over a period of time, it's like they're able to be like, oh yeah, like I rode this trail, like I think it's good to go, right? Like I think you would be able to do that, but that's not something that comes naturally or within one ride time. So here are some pictures of some of like the trail features. So that picture that's on the left, it's me, and hey, it's a stump. It's a big old redwood stump. And geez, this trail is, it's a great trail, but this particular part of the trail, I can't get through. So for me to be able to overpass that, I need somebody to actually lift the front end of my bike and me and the bike to get me over. This other one is picture on the right. This is one of like the most amazing adaptive support riders, Rob. But in this particular instance, I'm in a tree gate. That's what we call it. It's where there's two trees and it's a gate, you know. But as you can imagine, it's like, oh shucks, am I going to be able to fit through here? And this once again is like what I'm talking about. It's not like the skill level of like the features. It's not like, oh, that section of trail is too hard for an adaptive rider. No, it's like my bike is just different and I need some help. So uh that's a situation where I need some additional support. So something people always ask after these, which is why I started including these, like, where can we learn more about trail guidelines? And people always want to know, like, can I just like log on to the internet and search like adaptive trails? Well, yeah, sometimes that works, but a lot of times no. Trail Forks does have some adaptive riding. Trail Forks is an app you can use to search and plan and log your rides. There are some adaptive ratings on there. Some trail systems notate which trails you can ride with certain types of bike and the skill level. Some IMBA chapters or trail organizations have done a good job with that. But I want to point you to a resource. And this is for folks that are community leaders. This is for folks that do dig days. This is for folks that want to talk to their local trail organization. There is a resource out there for you. It's from Kootenai Adaptive Sport Association, and it's trail guidelines for adaptive riders and bikes. A lot of this is geared towards those three-wheel bikes. And the reason for that is that a lot of folks know what two-wheel upright bikes can do. And a lot of people have an idea of what's possible. But when it comes to three-wheel bikes and trikes and four-wheel bikes and bikes that are wider, it's just not as popular. People don't know what to do. So go ahead and look these up on the internet. Once this video is like posted live, I will drop this in the description below and you'll be able to find these. But the things that are covered here are the recommended trail width, the minimum amount of trail width. They talk about features here. They talk about camber. They talk about building berms and these kind of like, you know, gaps and rollers. So there's so many things that are covered within this trail guidelines. The second gen is out as well, so I encourage you to use that. But send this information to your IMBA chapter. Send this to the folks that are doing dig days. Send this to your friends. I want you to use this resource and share it widely, because so many people say like, well, how do I know? Like, how can I advocate for adaptive riders? Like, what do I do? This is how you do it. Even just passing this information on to people is so important, because people don't realize it exists and it's free. It's also free. So like, there's no reason why. And also, if you're an adaptive rider, you know, I do encourage you to look into this too, because then you're going to be able to, when somebody says, hey, like, what do you need on a trail? You'll be able to be like, hey, I got this resource for you. Let me give you the top 5 bullet points. And that's where, you know, we go into this thing right here where I'm talking about, oh, here we go, where I'm talking about trail width, camber, tipping hazard, features, exposure. Those are my top 5 bullet points, right? That's what I cite when people ask, what do I need? That's what I need. I also require like snacks and fun times, but that's not for trail considerations. But become familiar with these trail guidelines. This is knowledge. This is power. This is going to help so many people. And I also get the question too, like, well, we don't have any adaptive riders in our community, so why should we care about this? Or why don't I see more adaptive riders out there? Well, it's kind of like that phrase, and I'm dating myself a little bit. If you build it, they will come. So build the features, build the trails, even if you don't even see an adaptive rider, because I promise if you build it, if you tell people it's out there, people will come, people will show up, people will ride. And it also just feels so good to enter into a new riding zone and know that you're taken care of and you're being thought of. So, now that we've covered all about supporting and ride leading and trail considerations, there was a question that was in the chat. Are there opportunities for support rider trainings in person anywhere? Well, yes, there are. If you are interested in becoming a certified adaptive mountain bike coach, there are two certifications out there. You can go through BICP or you can go through PMBIA, and they each have adaptive modules and courses, and they will cover the ins and outs of guiding and riding with adaptive individuals and talk from a coaching perspective. Now, if you're not interested in becoming a coach, that's fine too. There are other ways that you can learn. So I encourage you to get in touch with your local adaptive organization. If you don't have one, you can just subscribe to my YouTube channel and just watch a bunch of stuff and ask questions whenever you want, or find adaptive riders that you can ride with and learn how to do some of this on your own. The biggest thing here and with everything is it starts with an invitation. So many people say, well, how can we have a more inclusive, chapter? How can we have more inclusive rides? Well, who are you inviting, right? Are you making it known that this is a safe space for adaptive riders? So it starts with an invitation. Team up with your local adaptive sports organization. Reach out to your local adaptive athlete. Reach out to, the VA. Reach out to individuals that have disabilities. Reach out to the day program in your area and say, hey, are you interested in going on a mountain bike ride? And I said, partner with local adaptive athletes. I would love to work with more people locally. I would love to ride and share this information. So reach out to me if you want to ride. And then, as kind of a basis, create and foster inclusion, right? Be the type of person that is welcoming for this. Think about the language that you use when you're marketing events. Think about, how to get more people into the fold. But it always just starts with an invitation. And if you're an individual and you're like, I don't want to lead a ride. I just want friends that are adaptive riders. Make some friends with individuals with disabilities and say, hey, do you want to go on a ride together? And that's all it has to be. We kind of approach this from this perspective of an organization standpoint. But if you're interested in riding with adaptive riders, just ask your friends that are disabled and be like, hey, do you want to ride? What do you need from me? How can we make you comfortable? And how can we make this a fun experience? The last thing I will say, and I always end all my talks with this, it's my motto. It doesn't matter what you ride or how you ride. It just matters that you're outside. And just matters that you're outside experiencing joy. I think it can be so easy to get worried about the types of bikes and what a person might need and how to support them. And oh no, I've never worked with a person with a disability, or oh no, I'm a new rider and I don't know how to do this. No, it's all about just being outside. It's just about having a good time. It's just about being in nature. And so, one of the big ground rules, right, is it's about having fun. And so with whatever you're doing, if you're supporting riders, if you need support as a rider, take away kind of all the stigma, take away all the things that you need to think about, and just have a good time and be outside. So I want to give a special thanks here. I am so excited. We're going to do a real official announcement in the next week or so, but Dirtbound has its first financial sponsor. Woo! So this is super exciting. This is brand new for 2025. Thank you so much, SRAM, for supporting Dirtbound and believing in the mission that we have and being here to support us. Once again, this is super exciting. This is the first year of support that we've had for these programs. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to be able to do for this. And then on to my own personal sponsors, Sierra Nevada, Chamois Butter, Bowhead, Untapped, Ergon, Darko. Thank you so much for supporting me as an individual so that I can be out here and do what I do. And thank you to everyone that showed up. So I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes. I'm going to allow you all to ask some questions. So I will be around for like the next 5 minutes, and let me know if you have any questions about this. And once again, thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. This is like, it's so exciting and such a joy to be able to be in this space. So I'm going to put the music on. I'll wait for questions, and I'll see you soon. So thank you. The next question is around as a beginner to adaptive riding and wanting to learn more, how can I find support riders? I think this is probably honestly the biggest thing. And for me, this has been a challenge, right? So I was fortunate enough to have like a couple friends that I could ride with very early on and kind of this like built-in community, but I recognize that that's not the case for most people. So what I will say is if you're interested in like learning how to ride more, reach out to your local trail organization. So you can just Google like, your trail system or mountain bike organization plus your town name. And hopefully the internet will give you some information. Reach out to somebody on there and just be like, hey, look, like I'm an adaptive rider and I need support. Is there maybe a group ride I can show up at? Or what's a good way for me to do that? And so showing up to a group ride too, might be good because then you're going to get to know people and yeah, find support riders. But I would say that's probably the best way to, start to connect with like support riders and networks. I also have friends that like use their Instagram for that. And so they'll just post a story on Instagram and be like, hey, like, is anybody available to help me, support ride on this day or go for a ride? Or does anybody want to come to this race with me? So don't be afraid to like ask for help. I know it's like really daunting, but I think people are more than happy and willing to help us. Great question. And great. Hi, Kevin. Yeah, thanks so much for showing up. Uh, all of this information will be on replay. So I will stay online for another 2 minutes if there's any other questions. All right, we have reached the 2 minute mark. So thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. Please come to the next one. Also, check out other videos on my YouTube if you want. Once again, thanks everyone for showing up. I hope you all have a good night and stay safe out there.